flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can you please make sure that your cell phones are either turned off or on silent? That's just for all the administrators, not you guys. Okay. Seeing that there's no public forum, any first? Or?
Sure. So first up, we'll have Mrs. DeVinny as part of our ongoing presentation schedule. It's kind of a mid-year data report. You have the full data report in at your disposal, and then Mrs. DeVinny is going to give you kind of the highlights going through that of where we are as we move along. So I'll turn it over to Mrs. DeVinny.
Thank you. So you'll notice that the mid-year data report looks very similar to the fall data report. I think it was Mrs. Decker who asked for a consistent format. So the same is true of the summary slides here to just walk you through what you have for data, and then we can talk about any questions you have about what you're seeing. So just as a review, everything we're doing around instruction this year is really focused on building that culture of data across the district. So in all of our coaching meetings and our faculty meetings, we're really working to build capacity of our staff to analyze data, to be able to use that to inform our instructional decisions moving forward. So what you have this time, in the fall, you've had more of the state assessment data. So now at the mid-year mark, what you have are those continued cohort data snapshots, so each grade level breakdown. But this time the charts, instead of being state assessment scores, they are benchmark assessments. So in the fall, the winter, and the spring of each school year, we give our students several benchmark assessments in reading and in math to measure their basic skills and capacity within each of those subject areas. So the graphs are relative to those benchmark assessments. So as we review those at the mid-year mark, there may be an administrator or two in the room who was like, whoa, this is a lot. But the great thing about getting this data mid-year is that it allows us to make adjustments for the second half of the year, rather than waiting till September when we receive state assessment data and the students are already moved on to the next grade level. So just again, as a reminder, this is the same image that we looked at in the fall. Our goal with looking at data is to look at multiple measures. Remember, we want to find this little sweet spot here in the middle. So rather than having one data source and hoping to identify the problem and maybe identifying something over here, we're really trying to triangulate all those sources to find what it is that our students really need to help them be successful. So we'll focus in this time on the second grade. So again, you have that demographic overview. So this is updated from the beginning of the year. So if enrollments have adjusted at all, you see those numbers change. So this cohort is about 50 students. Gives you the breakdown by gender, subgroup by race, special education counts, the percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged, and our absentee rate. So this is the average to date. So our daily attendance rate is just about 95% for this cohort of students. When we dive in and look at their performance with reading and with math data, so DIBELS and iReady Reading at second grade are the two benchmark assessments that we're using. So DIBELS, you can see the breakdowns of students at each percentage level. iReady, the same thing. So these are snapshots, what you're looking at here in the raw numbers. So at the mid-year mark, this is the percentage of students that were performing at each of those levels. So they're consistently color-coded. Each assessment calls their rating system something different. So DIBELS classifies them as intensive, strategic, core, or core plus for support. iReady calls them something different. So I've color coordinated them so it's easy for you to see reds compared to reds and so on. Again, math, we're looking at iReady math and FastBridge math data at this level. Again, you can see those numbers in there. I don't need to read them to you. And then we also have this year committed to administering the MySavers screener. So that's a social emotional screener. So all students in kindergarten through 12th grade are completing some form of that. At kindergarten and first, the teachers complete the screener for the students based on what they're seeing. So that's snapshot overview of that second grade. The next page that you have with those charts shows you the progression for those second grade students. So when we look at these students in terms of reading, what we want to see in a quick overview is improvement in red, or no, not improvement in reds, sorry. Improvement in blues and greens. We want to see those increasing. We want to see reds and yellows decreasing. So in some of this, then we have to look at the numbers to dive in a little deeper. So here, the green appears to go down slightly from 44 to 43, but the blue increases. So you can assume perhaps this is going down because there are so many students who move to the highest level of performance with that. You can see a significant decrease in red at that grade level. So that's showing us that the students are moving up in their basic skills or improving with their basic skills. The same is true with their reading scores, a significant improvement in both the blue and the green for our students, with the decrease in those students performing below grade level. I'll show you the next slide and then we'll talk a little bit about what's in here. So the next is just a zoomed in view of their math data scores that you have. Again, second grade, you really want to celebrate their progress of improvements in blues and greens. And then we see a decrease in those students marking or scoring below grade level. So one of the things that we have been really working on this year with that culture of data is to then recognize and celebrate pieces where we're seeing the growth. So when we talked earlier in the year about the growth or the goal setting that our staff did, second grade was one that I highlighted of they worked so hard analyzing their fall data. They were really strategic about setting their goal and their action steps for what they were going to do to support their students. And their performance or their growth really reflects that. So our second graders last week enjoyed a nice little blue and green party. So we gave them a little letter with a bag full of blue and green treats, some blue straws, some applesauce packs, and they were able to decorate their classroom in blue and green crepe paper and decorations. And the letter explained to them what blue and green meant, why they were celebrating blue and green. So it was a really nice thing to visit each of those classrooms during that celebration and have second graders be able to explain, well, we're celebrating blue and green because on our mid-year testing, we grew the most. We had the most growth of grade levels. And they were quite proud of that as 8-year-olds could be. But it was really nice to know that they could articulate what it was that they were celebrating as a grade level. So again, what we are trying to do is focus in on what are our next steps based on that data. So as Matt said when we looked at the numbers back in December, this is our new baseline. We're gaining knowledge about where we are now to make those steps moving forward. So since our last presentation or since the fall, our teams have gone through and started to do standard analysis and identifying priority standards. So that means at each grade level, we have a list of, let's say, 30 standards from New York State that we have to meet in our curriculum. Our staff have gone through and prioritized those to say, these are the 5 most important standards at this grade level, either because they are most assessed on a state assessment, or they have the greatest connection to the next grade level's curriculum, or they are the most important for lifelong connections. So through doing that work, our staff has then been able to look at their scope and sequence documents, the order and the calendar for which they're teaching things to say, wow, we really liked this unit. This module is our favorite unit, but none of the standards from this module are in our priority standards. So we know that we shouldn't spend 2 months on this because we really enjoy it. We'll abbreviate it and move on to another unit that addresses our priority standards. Our teams will continue to participate in regional discussions and collaboration for those new exams. We talked about that the last time, that one of our wonders out there is the new Regents exams that are coming. So we'll continue to provide support for that. We talked in December also about the Kyler morning meetings, how Dennis is using those to really follow the scope and sequence progress with each of the teams to make sure that they are following where they should be in their curriculum with fidelity. And our coaches have really been instrumental in that work to make sure that we're meeting with every grade level to support their needs. So, you know, lots of people will tell you, I'm not a math person, that scares me, the numbers scare me. Our coaches have been really wonderful about sitting side by side with teachers to walk them through, what does this mean? When I'm seeing this student grow, or when I'm seeing this student regress, what does that mean? What is triggering that? Our elementary AIS model, we talked about that at the last meeting as well. They continue to meet as grade level teams every 6 weeks to review student progress monitoring data and say, all right, Jen was in this intervention group and they were really focusing on blends. Now we have completed that little intervention at the end of 6 weeks. She has shown progress. She's going to move to this group or focus on this goal instead now. So that data-driven work with those teams has really been led by Haley Bybee as our MTSS coordinator to keep those teams constantly looking at data to support their students. And the other piece that has been going on often on board meeting nights, so Amanda has had to set up late for you all, is a elementary-wide book study around the Knowledge Matters campaign. So this has highlighted, as we talk about triangulating data, our staff is looking at this hard data of where our students are performing and what their needs are, but at the same time, they've been reviewing this book as more qualitative data of what influences student learning. So the Knowledge Gap book study really focuses on the structure of your curriculum. So our current reading curriculum focuses on skills, it's organized by skills, and then the knowledge or the texts are kind of plugged into the skills. The research behind the Knowledge Matters campaign is that, especially in higher poverty districts, our curriculum should be focused around knowledge or themes or topics, and then the skills built into that. So one of the big discrepancies between higher poverty districts and those of more affluent backgrounds is that disconnect in vocabulary skills. So students from higher income families typically have more lived experiences, more vacations where they gain more exposure to vocabulary. So this for us has been really eye-opening as we're looking to conclude that curriculum eval that was started last year to identify new curriculum moving forward. We know that we need to look in that direction of a curriculum that's organized around theme or knowledge first. So that would be, if you're familiar with what other districts are using, that might be a CKLA, ELA curriculum, or Wit and Wisdom. There are several that are identified. So we're looking at multiple data sources around each of those curriculum pieces to make sure it's checking all of these boxes. The other piece with the priority standards work that our staff has done, as I outlined with them when we started, the goal of doing that work is that Matt knows these are my top 5 standards for 5th grade ELA. So if he's a 5th grade ELA teacher looking at curriculum, he's looking at where and how those standards are taught to make sure that we're choosing the curriculum that best teaches those priority standards. So we will continue. These priorities are all the same ones that we talked about in December. So we're continuing to work toward having a guaranteed and viable curriculum, something that's consistent across the grade level and consistent from grade level to grade level so that we're not leaving gaps as students progress throughout the district. We're going to continue to reinforce and train our staff in those high impact teaching strategies. So the specific tasks that we ask students to engage in, certain things are research proven to be more effective at accelerating learning. So we want to make sure we're using those as we're teaching. We'll continue to grow our MTSS systems. Our MTSS team was actually just together today at a regional roundtable to continue to grow systems rather than just people running the systems. And then we're going to continue to build this culture around data. So in addition to what you have here, our teams have also seen data reports that are specific to students. So our teachers have student by student. So it might say Jen Deviney, and then it has all of my individual scores for all of those benchmarks, and they're color coded. So if Pat is my teacher, he can take a quick look at my data and say, okay, Jen went up in reading, she improved in this assessment, but she regressed in math. And then I can go, or Pat can go, take a deeper look to see what it is that might be my struggle in math. So our staff have that. Our administrators have also reviewed this data, and they have also reviewed data by teacher as well to say, all right, so teacher Pat has 10 students in his class who are on grade level, he has 5 who may be struggling, and then he can have that conversation with teacher Pat to say, what's happening in your classroom? How are you supporting these students who need a little bit more support? At the middle school, they're working on systems-wide work around that. So how can we meet with students and engage with them around their data? So especially by upper elementary and middle school, students have the capacity to understand what it means when we're looking at their data, the same way as when they're looking at their grades. So we're working on some plans to meet with students individually, so that will also increase their buy-in when they're taking these assessments. They don't just randomly click to try to get through them. So we talked about second grade as a celebration. We talked about the AIS model, a few other pieces just to highlight in this because we do want to continue to recognize those steps forward. Our kindergarten team showed significant growth. Our first grade really highlighted ELA growth. And immediately before I even got into the data, the first grade team came to me and said, okay, our ELA was really great. This is what we did. This is what we did. We know our math didn't come out the way we wanted to, and here's the changes we've already talked about to get that back on track. Before I think it was the day after benchmarking assessments were completed. So that to me is really exciting to see our teams looking at this and saying, how do we use this to change what we're doing in the classroom? Our third grade team, you'll see in their data, did not show significant academic growth. So they have used this data to say, all right, what is happening in our classrooms that's prohibitive to that? So they have worked with Dennis and with Haley as our MTSS coordinator to put additional SEL supports in there so that students are more able to focus and engage during learning times. They've built in some different brain breaks for students who might need that. So they're using it to really analyze what's happening in the classroom and what the needs are. We talked about priority standards. Fifth grade was one of those that said, this is our favorite module, we spend a lot of time here, but now we know we actually shouldn't be spending a lot of time on this module. We're going to rush through, we're going to speed up our progress through this and get to one that is more of a priority standard focus. And then I think the other piece too to really highlight that makes Red Creek special when we talk about staff retention is those teams rallying around the newer staff on their teams. So if, so let's take third grade where we have a largely new teaching staff and a returning special education teacher. Our coaches have really rallied around our third grade team. They're meeting with them every Friday morning before contractual hours to prep the curriculum for the next week. Pam is making sure that even though I've stepped out of a third grade classroom, I'm here supporting you every step of the way. We see that also on teams where there's one new staff member. They're really making sure that those new staff members are brought up to speed on what we're teaching and why we're teaching it. So all of those pieces really speak to the culture of being data driven and where the buy-in building that we need to do before we adopt a new curriculum. So I could have come into this role and Matt into his, and we could have sat down in August and said, okay, let's pick a new math curriculum, let's pick a new ELA curriculum, and rolled them out and said, all right, now everyone do. And I think we would have continued to see similar results if we had not taken the time to stop and build this culture and this buy-in. And I look at some of our staff members who have been really burnt out the last few years who are saying, okay, I'm with you. How can we fix this? You know, my team wants to make a different name for ourselves. We don't want to be the team that's highlighted every year as our students regressing. What can we do? How can we do this together? So those culture pieces, I think Matt has probably spoken about that before as well, that we can't really get a measure on those, but these pieces really speak to that culture shift that we need to be able to make strong academic improvement. So I also talked about in my board update, I gave you a copy of the growth goal mid-year evaluation. So our teams have been working through those, and we get all of them back. I can share them with Matt to pass along with you. So you can see the reflections of our teachers as they're sitting as teams and analyzing this data and saying, all right, what worked? What did we do that showed growth? What have we learned that has influenced our students' learning as well and how we're teaching? And then what are our next steps from now till the end of the school year? So some of those reflections really highlight those culture pieces that I know I have a coach I can go to for extra resources, or I know when something is challenging in my classroom, I have a coach that I can rely on to come help to support that as well. So we will share those with you all coming up, but they really are just a supplement to what the hard data says. So the last piece to share with you in here, this is an image that the coaches and administrators talked about in our instructional council, that this work of moving forward isn't as quick as flip a switch. It's not an overnight. I think Mrs. Decker said that the last time when we talked about that. It's not an overnight thing. So we're really looking at it as like climbing Mount Everest. Each of those base camps, you have to stop and kind of acclimate. We have to be cognizant of staff morale, staff buy-in with each one of these steps. So we'll continue to build that trust and that buy-in. So our goal really for this year gets you to the 4th base camp. Our goal is to make sure that all of our staff can identify those most important concepts and standards within their curriculum, so that when we adopt new curriculum later this year and train our staff in that over the summer, they understand and know we have to teach this curriculum with fidelity because we did the research to show that this is why this curriculum is important. It's important that it's in this order because it highlights our priority standards. And then we'll continue on from there to continue to train those instructional strategies and build capacity with new curriculum as well, while continuing to reinforce this data cycle. So as we talked about the new school calendar, I hope that you know how much work goes into planning for that, as Matt and I are like, okay, so where can we put a data day? How do we make sure our team has time to sit and analyze fall assessment data and mid-year assessment data? So that is reflected in our school calendar. We've talked about it with our budget as well, just continuing to support this culture work to grow our students and our staff moving forward. So with that, what questions do you have for me?
So we're only going to discuss elementary at this point?
So I did just what I did with you in the fall of highlighting one grade level to explain what the data is in there. So you have everything in your report. You can certainly ask questions about any of it if you'd like.
Can you refresh my head about who came up with the goals, the grade level goals? Is that the grade level teachers?
At the elementary level, so every team at that October superintendent conference day met as a team to create their goals. So at the elementary level, that was grade level teams. At the middle school and high school, it's departments. So each lead teacher has a team. So each one of those teams developed goals.
And then who reviews those?
Our administrative team, our coaches.
So while we're on the topic of goals, I guess I didn't dig into them as deep last. It was a little overwhelming last time, so I dug into them a little bit more. And they seem inconsistent. Like from grade level to grade level, there's not a ton of consistency. Some only focus on reading or ELA. Some don't even mention math at all. And then I got to the high school, like the 6-12 goals, and a lot of them aren't even actually goals. They're just like, we're going to do this task. That's not a goal. It's not something measurable. It's not something that is really reflected in the data. And in the presentation, we focused a lot. I know you pulled out second grade, but even in the slides after that, it was a lot of data about elementary school, and like the 3rd grade team saw this and they did this, and the 4th grade team saw this and they did this. Middle school and high school, we don't really see anything of, and it's concerning to me because looking at the data, and I know that IXL is, I think, new in the high school. I don't think we've done that in the past for them. And the iReady, but we have 0% at or above grade level for our 12th grade math, our 11th grade math, 7% at or above for our 10th grade math, reading, most of our kids aren't meeting benchmarks for reading, so I know that it's, you know, you show the Mount Everest and there's a time, like a time expectation, but I feel like we're really, I don't wanna say failing our high school kids, but we're gonna put these kids out that aren't ready. So I guess my question, because that was more of a statement, is what are we really doing for our kids? Because I'm nervous that we're gonna put a whole bunch of kids out into the world that will then be community members who can't read adequately, can't do math adequately, we're not preparing them for life outside of Red Creek. So what are we doing for them?
So first, to your piece about data, at the elementary level, there are more benchmark assessments, so there are more of those circles of data that we're looking at. Benchmarking is really new to the high school this year. The middle school has been more consistently doing that in the past.
Yeah.
So some of this work with IXL and iReady diagnostics in the fall was much more inconsistent in it giving those diagnostics. I think if you look back at the fall data report, it will say in there will be an asterisk and something in black that says only this percentage of students completed this diagnostic.
Right.
So there's some discrepancy in terms of how frequently they're assessed, because at the middle school and high school, students have grades as another data point that are coming home. So it looks a little different from one building to the next in terms of this mid-year data that we're looking at. The high school teachers also have grades and course failures, that those are reviewed by our teams and our staff and our administrative team. They are not shared out here in this report. It just, again, trying to be consistent with what we looked at in the fall and what we're looking at now. They're just not included in here. No, give me the second part of what we're talking. What are we doing for those students?
Right.
So we talked a little bit about at the middle school level, trying to engage students in that data-driven culture as well to build that buy-in. So if my child doesn't know why school matters or why this assessment matters, what is their buy-in for that? And if my daughter Addison is having a meeting with one of her teachers that she really trusts, and the teacher says, you know, Addie, you're falling behind in reading. This shows me that you're falling behind in reading. Let's talk about what that means in the future. That grows, hopefully, that would grow her motivation. At the high school level, they're doing the same work of trying to meet with students. Right now, they're working with seniors to make sure that everyone has what they need. Part of this work has been our career awareness teacher this year to help students try to engage with their data and their performance to move forward. This is done in advisory to meet with students to talk about where they are academically and move forward. But I think we can all agree that this is a focus area for us moving forward, is how we're continuing to support them.
It doesn't feel particularly like a focus area, and I think the kids who are in 11th and 12th grade and are not doing well know that they're not doing well. So sitting down with them to say, you know, you're falling behind in whatever, you're not meeting the benchmark or whatever, I think, so what are we offering them? When we say you're falling behind, how are we supporting them?
So when you say it feels like we're not doing anything, what would that look like to you? To feel like as a mom, my child is getting what they need, what would that look like?
Just math in particular. I know that there aren't a ton of supports for kids who are struggling in math in our district. So if you're struggling and you say, I'm struggling in math, that's it. We don't have like a math AIS person that I'm aware of. We didn't last year at least.
So we do have several math AIS classes this year. We also have our Algebra 2 teacher doing math labs after school for experiential learning to try to reinforce concepts that are taught within the class with the real world connections. So that has been a shift from last year.
Okay.
Some of a struggle with AIS classes is that they have to be for more ongoing help rather than the pop-in help that's more appropriate for after school. For the ongoing help, we have to build those into our master schedule at the start of the process. So if we say, all right, Elizabeth and Jolene and Nancy need a math AIS class, that has to be scheduled early on in the scheduling process rather than placing all of your other classes and then hoping that you three are available at the same time the math teacher is.
So outside of AIS, I guess, just a kid that has not struggled and now I'm struggling. What can I do?
What do you
Where,
do?
where do
Can
I,
I-
how am I?
Can I interject for 1 second?
Yes.
So maybe to bring it back to kind of the board side of things. So in a few minutes, I'm assuming we're going to hear a phenomenal budget presentation. Not to say that everyone looks at this, like maybe you go home and you say to Addison, I saw your math grade and it's terrible. It's not
I
because
might.
you pulled up
I
this
might.
data. It's because you saw 48 on it and you know that she didn't study or something. When we are not looking currently to put any additional staff in place for the following year, if you have parents at home, if you have students that approach and say, hey, listen, this is like the second year, the third year, how do we understand how we're putting the money where it needs to be?
I would attribute that to the culture of the coaching of being data driven. When I got here last year and did that data presentation for you all, after we left our admin meeting where we looked at it, our now superintendent texted me and said, hey, that's the first time we've done that in a really long time, to be looking at that data and keeping that at the forefront of all of our discussions. Outside of that admin meeting, I didn't attend an MTSS meeting last year where we looked at data like this. So we're going to continue to build that capacity. We could present a budget that says, you know what, we need 10 new math teachers. But we still have 5 math teachers on our staff and we have to build their capacity as teachers. So that's where our work is this year, is building that capacity of our staff. In some cases, it's undoing some of the morale challenges that have occurred over the last few years and helping our staff to remember why it is that they went into teaching and why they want to be here other than just a really great pension. So it's those culture pieces and building that capacity of our staff to do
Right.
that work to show that growth. So, you know, again, we could have 10 more math teachers, but if they've given up because, you know, I do everything I can and my students continue to fail, they don't want to do the work, they don't show up, then we're just on this hamster wheel spinning out, the students saying,
Well, and I think,
I can't improve, and the teachers feeling like they're
They
not
can't.
doing anything that's helping them.
yeah, and I think that makes a good point. I think it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elizabeth, if this wasn't the direction that you're going. I think it, for first grade, and I don't remember what your call out for first grade was either. It was ELA and not math, or the other
Right.
way around. For a first grade parent, you got lots of time. For an 11th grade parent, it is difficult not to see this as, sorry, we're trying, and hopefully we can help you before you get out of here, present company excluded. So I think that, and again, maybe this goes back to a budget question on our side, is that, you know, sometimes it's hard to have this conversations with our other district members about, yes, we're aware, and it's just a slower process than we'd like, because we don't want to leave anybody behind.
Right. And it really is finding that balance of being proactive at the elementary grades where we're trying to get out ahead of it, but then simultaneously offer reactive responses at the high school level. So Ginny Slobe is teaching reading classes this year. Last year she was doing only learning labs. This year she's teaching some specific reading classes for those students who are still reading at a second or a third grade level. So, right, we have to balance our resources to be able to do both at the same time, and sometimes weigh the question of which has a greater impact, which has a greater urgency. And I think Kristen DeFeo, one of our BOCES coaches, has really reflected on our model of supporting every single teacher across the district as focusing on tier 1. So those supports for every single teacher, every single student, because our secondary teachers are getting just as much work and support as our elementary teachers are. So our approach with those coaches, and you know, that's why they're reflected in the budget of trying to continue some of those ARP supports, highlights trying to continue to offer those pieces for our students. You know, we're keeping our current staffing levels. We're looking at our math teachers to keep offering those AIS. We're working very diligently on a high school master schedule to make sure that we're maximizing our resources to potentially offer more AIS supports, more enrichment supports as well. So it's building that capacity within our current structures to move things forward. But it's not overnight, and for our type A folks, myself, our coaches, it's really, really hard to not say, all right, let's just come in on a Saturday and we'll bang it all out, we'll get it all done and be, move forward. It's great for the people sitting in the room, but those that can't be there don't get that same capacity building if we do it on our own on a Saturday.
Thank you.
I think I'll just share some of the thoughts that I had as I was looking at the data. And I mean, it is difficult to, in the presentation, just look at, say, second grade, which is your highlight class. You said you had great buy-in from that team who really was looking at the data and was really intentional with the work that they did, and the outcomes are there, which is fantastic. But some questions are, what about for those teams that aren't buying in? Is there reflection there to the staff itself? And some of the data, I mean, when you look at the fourth grade team and this year's fourth grade and look at where they started to where they went, I mean, third grade, as you mentioned, was a really strong group of teachers. They've been there a long time. So then they get into fourth grade, and these students test at the beginning of fourth grade, and they're strong. They've come off a really strong year. And then you see a drastic drop by mid-year in fourth grade. I mean, obviously it's a good group of kids. Are we looking at the team that's teaching them and not able to touch base with those students who succeeded with a different group the year before? So those kinds of things. I very much so know that this isn't an overnight fix. I was very hopeful that I would come in and be like, all right, we're making some progress. There's some of that, but there was more of where we were regressing from beginning of the year to mid-year than there was improving. And that was really disheartening and really shocking, actually. Look at kindergarten, first grade, second grade. They haven't even been in school long enough to really be that far behind. And they can be.
Right, well, you can't show 3 grade levels below in second grade because it doesn't
They're not even there yet. So then I start to get to 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. And that's where I start to get some anxiety because these kids are 40, 50, 60% below grade level, 3+. I mean, how do they have the time to catch up? And of course, to kind of go off of what Elizabeth said, looking at 10th, 11th, 12th, 12th grade, what are we gonna really do to save the kids? Like you said, there's grades. And if you're saying that the high school data isn't something that's super reliable for consistency, I get it. But I don't want to look at it if it's not super reliable, and we should be looking at the grades. I want to look at the grades then, because I don't want to look at something and be like, wow, our seniors, we've got 10% of our seniors are reading at or above grade level. 90% of our seniors can't read, and we're shipping them out the door. And I mean, same 11th grade. And again, we don't have time to fix that. 11th grade, 10th grade, at what point do we say, okay, this is our focus, our focus grade, our 9th graders this year, not saying we obviously can't say, sorry, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, good luck. But at what point do we say, we've got to make sure these kids really, at this point, they're ready when we send them out into the world. I know it's not just Red Creek. I mean, we just sent a group of seniors out that are completely not ready for the world. Many of them dropping out after one semester. Many of them going to schools and leaving those schools and coming back closer to home. They're not ready. I know COVID plays a role in that. But, I'm just really concerned on, is our staff ready to be self-reflective as well and say, okay, the landscape of education is changing. It's not necessarily you as a teacher stand up in front of the class and teach at students anymore. Are we looking at, okay, like you said, those teachers that are saying, okay, my class isn't getting it, the kid isn't getting it for whatever reason. They don't want to do the work, but why? Is that all these students in the class that aren't doing the work and don't want to do the work? Or is that the method of teaching that's happening that kids just aren't getting? You know, are we looking at that other side of it? Is, I understand the culture, I like the direction we're going with all of that, and it's going to take time, but I don't want to lose a bunch of kids while it takes time. I don't want to lose 3 grades of kids.
Right, so the mom in me says, we can't say these ninth graders, they're going to get all of our focus and attention because there are so many of them. And I think that that again is the value of our, how many coaches we have to provide that support. So every teacher is able to get that personalized support. So if I'm not at that place of being reflective, my coach is working with me on analyzing the data to be reflective on my practices and how they're impacting my students. Versus the second grade team that dove right in October, was really excited to be looking at data that was immediately reflected from the beginning of the year. They have already gotten to the point of reviewing their report cards to adjust them. So they have kind of flown through this goal setting work, shifting what they're doing in the classroom. Now they're at the place of how are we reporting that out to parents. So each team is being appropriately pushed at their level, but starting at where they are. So if we assume that they all are at that place that we're ready to start talking about those exit outcomes of their course, we will find that we'll get through a year and we won't see different results, and we'll say, oh, we have to peel back the layers of the onion a little bit more. We have to focus on our curriculum. Oh, we have to peel back a little more. Perhaps our staff don't understand what their standards are. Peel it back a little bit more. So that's why we've been working on all of those pieces at the same time, the standards, the curriculum, to build that capacity of our staff. And I also think at the mid-year mark, again, knowing that our staff has not been looking at this data the last few years, it's really easy to get in that cycle of saying, you know what, my students don't care, they're checked out, they don't want to do the work, and lose some of that reflectiveness. But when you look at this data, that's the piece that creates that sense of urgency within staff to look at it and say, all right, you know what, my students didn't do nearly as well as my other colleague here. What was the difference between our classes? And our coaches are able to meet with teams and individuals to support those reflective conversations. They are really at that place of having trusting relationships with each of the staff members that they work with. I just had Mrs. Kloon in my office this morning talking about a teacher that she's really come to build a relationship with that she didn't at the beginning of the year have that relationship. And so now she says, now this teacher trusts me, so the teacher is willing to say, this is what I'm doing in my class that's not working, how do I fix it? So it's getting our staff to that place of being reflective enough to identify what a problem might be, but then being willing and trusting enough to say, I can ask for help without fear of punishment for asking for help.
Yeah. You definitely don't want people to feel
It is
like there's a
everything
fear.
all
Yeah.
at once.
Right, okay. Thank you for listening and for responding.
And I think that your sentiments and concerns are shared by your administrative team, by your instructional coaches, by your lead teachers. All of our work this year has been around creating that sense of urgency among every staff member.
Thank you. I like that sense of urgency. I appreciate those words, thank you.
Can you talk about what, when you're a senior, of what reading at grade level means though?
So in terms of this measure, it's a college and career ready reading level. So the ability to move into college and pick up a college level text. We're looking at Lexile levels, so those are numbers within there of every text. You can get a Lexile level for that, so the level of difficulty. So that's a college level Lexile level for a 12th grader. college and career ready also means, can students unpack the language of a job posting or a job application to be able to understand what it is that they may be applying for. If it's talking about benefits or other responsibilities of a job, we want them to be able to read those. So some of the reactive pieces to that in our high school career awareness class, they're looking at job descriptions, they're looking at job applications to specifically unpack those skills that perhaps those students don't have the reading level to be able to read on their own. Let's specifically unpack them, so we're building some of those life skills as a reactive measure.
Thanks.
Other questions?
What are you thinking?
I have a thought. Well, I don't know if it's a question or, but there's only so much that you all can do in terms of when the students leave for the day, right? After school, they go home, they have different responsibilities, everybody's going home to a different environment. But what type of discussions have you all had as administrators or staff in terms of intervention at the family and home level? Is there some sort of standardized plan? I just would like to know more about kind of insight in that area.
So this is a big place where our community schools folks come in. We have 2 community schools coordinators in the district, and their primary focus areas are around that parent and community engagement piece. So building those relationships, so the parent who maybe doesn't trust school or had a negative experience, I had a great experience as a student, I don't have a problem walking through the doors. But if I had, as a student, had a negative experience, chances are I'm going to say, oh yeah, I didn't do well in Spanish either, it makes sense that you're failing it too, no big deal. Oh yeah, the principal was out to get me too, I'm sure they're out to get you. So building those trusting relationships with parents, and our community schools coordinators are really able to go out and meet the parents where they are in that environment, or what they're trying to create is that environment where it's safe for parents to start to engage with the school, so we can grow that capacity to bring them in. I believe that most parents inherently want to be engaged in supporting their children's education, but many don't know how.
Right.
So they're trying to build those relationships so that as we move forward, our staff is able to continue to grow those supports. When we are looking at new curriculum, we're specifically also going to be looking for resources that communicate out with parents. So does this program have parent communication pieces that help us with that work to support and say, you know, in first grade, we're learning about these topics, here are things you can do with your children at home to support that. We've also created this year parent communication guides. I think I talked about that in a previous board update, that for every grade level goes through that to say, here's our new big topics for first grade reading, here are things we're working on, here are things you can do to support that at home as well. So that will be a communication piece, but then how we share that with parents in the fall at open house will really determine if those are actually an effective tool to help us or just something we may need to check the box.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Question?
I do. Some of the high school goals are very specific with timelines, and then others are very non-specific. So when will the next data report come out? Is that the beginning of the next school year?
So likely, and we'll have to figure that out. You may be able to get a summer data report. So our next benchmarking is typically at the end of May or beginning of June. So we could do an abbreviated version of this in the summer to give you end of year diagnostic data and Regents exam data. And then we can add to that in the fall when our state assessment scores come back to us for grades 3 through 8. So some of the timeline is just delayed waiting on those pieces, but we can do the same next big report with comparable data after those end of year diagnostics.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Deviney. To me and our administrative team, I think, and I think we heard it tonight with the board, when we're building that culture, when we're trying to talk about some of these having these difficult conversations, the power starts with the ability to have these conversations. So up until this year, we have not had quantifiable data at any point other than at our end of the year formative assessments. So Regents exams, 3 through 8 assessments, and then as Jen talked about, we are reactive a year later in trying to make adjustments and predictions without anything scientific behind it. So even though this is murky, feels yucky, this isn't maybe presenting data in our student achievement data in glowing waves, the ability to have these conversations brings us down a path where we have the ability to review and react on a much quicker basis than we have in the past. And again, it's not an excuse for any specific grade level or group of kids, because of course they deserve every student here deserves a very best viable curriculum, the best efforts from all of our teaching staff. But sometimes that knowledge allows our teachers to make those adjustments more quickly and to provide mid-year changes or 3/4 of the way through the year changes before it gets worse or gets later or doesn't go addressed over the course of that time. So, it's new for us, it's new for you, it's new for our teachers. We have lots of moving pieces in place. And oftentimes, when you read research on implementation of new programs, there's oftentimes a dip in what you see with effectiveness of those things before you get a true measure of these things. And of course, as we looked at our Regents data from previous years, I would point out that I would not see a direct current correlation between our Regents data and our ELA 12th grade data that showed 0% of students reading at grade level or whatever information was presented, because we know an admirable percentage of our students received passing rates last year on that 11th grade Regents exam. So trying to find measures that represent both the standards from New York State that are required, but also what we feel is inherent understanding and skills necessary to be viable members of the community is important for both sides. So not an excuse, just where we are. And I think Jen and her team should be commended in one way for their willingness to be transparent and to share. It's easy to share good news. It's easy to share things when everything is going well. It's not so easy when you know that there's rooms and areas for improvement. And that's, part of that transparency process is bringing this information to the public, to you, the people that are watching this at home, the conversations in our lead teacher meetings. So things are happening. Certainly, room for growth, room for improvement, continued focused efforts on some of this work. But we all would share the same sentiment that I'm hearing from the board, that the urgency, to use Jen and Julian's words, right? There's still an urgency on our side as well to continue to look for ways to increase the effectiveness of what we do every day with our students. With that, we'll transition to Danielle's presentation, the next episode of our budget presentation. You can binge watch all of them, should that be something. Right. And we do have, again, as a reminder, we have our budget workshop, which is coming up in a couple weeks. So kind of layering these things in. But right now, I will turn over to Danielle.
Thank you. So yes, we do have our budget workshop on March 20th. I did want to highlight here, we are coming up on the very end of this budgetary timeline. So pretty soon, we're going to have adoption, our formal budget hearing, the newsletters going at home to everybody in our community, and then of course, our final vote. So opening it up, last time, we talked about what are our budget priorities. And really, although it's not exciting to us, our biggest priority right now is preservation. So we have a financial landscape as a community where the state has indicated that funding may not be as flush as it once was. In a district like ours that really heavily relies on that state aid to operate our budget, that is cause for pause. We are also talking about preserving some of these programs that we've started up using those stimulus funds that are about to expire. So we've seen good impacts from those programs we've started. I know there's been a lot of great feedback in the community for some of the things like our elementary summer school, some of those other programs that we've had going on. What we're looking to do is balance that fiscal pressure with the good things we've been able to do with those funds and the impacts they've had on our students. So we're really looking at that preservation, efficiency, putting our resources where they make the biggest impact on our students and stretching those dollars as far as we can. In context of all of that, we also came into this budget season with a gap to begin with, before all those outside pressures come into place. So when we talk about that right sizing, I know we had spoken about it's going to be a kind of a multi-year plan to get us back to where we need to be. With that plan comes tightening of the belt, making sure that we are doing those efficiencies, stretching our dollars, evaluating what's most effective for our students and our staff, trimming away some of that fat, so to speak, so that we can take the time to get right-sized gently. So some of the things that we have seen work, we have our existing programs, which I know Jen has been doing a lot of work on making sure that we see that effectiveness in the student achievement side. We've also had great success with additional professional development to encourage our staff to continue learning and growing within our district, as well as a great number of extracurricular activities for our students. And we are trying as much as possible to maintain our class sizes, which are lower than what we see in some similar districts. I did add in there as well, continuing the use of the capital outlay. So we are able to do a small project up to $100,000 a year through the general fund, through our regular voting process. And that's a really important thing for us to continue doing, because what it allows us to do is kind of cover the gaps in between one capital project and the next, and address some small items without having to wait 4 or 5 years for us to have a next capital project vote. So that is something that we are trying to preserve and focus on, because it allows us to have the great facilities that our students enjoy. So I did want to talk about our tax cap. We, in our calculation, are allowed to have a 3.8% increase with a simple majority vote. I know that this is commonly referred to as a 2% cap, so I just wanted to take a moment to explain why it's 3.8%, which is whenever we don't go fully to the cap, we have that balance, that difference the state considers carryover and it gets added in, as well as there are some small exclusions that go into that calculation. So I know that we commonly refer to it as 2%, but it's actually 3.8% for us this year. If we went fully to that cap, that would give us a maximum levy of about $5.1 million. For context, our levy this year was 4.9. So it's about $187,000 overall increase if we go fully to that 3.8%. In the numbers that I'm presenting to you tonight is a 3% increase, or $147,000, which would bring our levy to just over $5 million. And so when we're looking at this, we're trying to balance what we need fiscally as a district with what our community members need as taxpayers. So in a district like ours without a lot of industry, the burden of this tax levy really falls on families and homeowners. Where in a district that has a lot of industry, it's spread out a little bit. So we're trying to balance those two factors. But certainly what we end with for budget adoption, we could go fully to that 5.1 million. So an overview of where the budget is at currently is $25.6 million. That does include a reduction of the Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES instructional coaches. It does keep all of our internal coaches that were hired through the COVID funds. And it has, again, 73% for program. That's pretty consistent for our district, and 18% for the capital. We did also fund through the COVID programs an IT technician to assist with our one-to-one Chromebook things. That is through Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES, not a district employee. And then for our revenues on the other side, we are estimating at $25.1 million. What's different on this slide than all the other presentations we've had so far is the use of $750,000 in fund balance and a 3% tax levy increase. So previously when we talked about that $1.2 million gap, that's what I would consider the true gap. We had talked about doing a multi-year plan for getting us right-sized. So we're trying to, instead of retaining the number of fund balance and reserves to close that gap, slowly bring that down until we're completely right-sized. So a combination of those three things, right? Fund balance, tax levy, and reduction cuts, more use of efficiency in our funds. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the compositions that we'll see on the ballot this time around. So we're of course going to have our budget vote. Every year we try to go out and buy some new buses. So we'll have those in there. The library tax levy will be on our vote, as well as the establishment of a new capital reserve. So we did approve the use of the capital reserve for this 2023 capital project. It is expiring at the end of this fiscal year. So what we'd like to do is basically set up a new savings account so that the next capital project down the road, hopefully we're right sized, we're putting money back in our savings, and by the time we get there, we should be able to use that to help mitigate the tax impact like we did this time around for our voters. And then up next, we have the budget workshop. In these slides, there still is a budget gap. We do have some ideas about how to address that, and in the budget workshop, I would like to make sure that we have consensus on where we're going forward with that. After that, April 10th is our set for a budget adoption, and then May 7th will be our budget hearing. The only thing on the calendar after that budget hearing is the budget vote, where we learn whether or not we are all set to go forward in the next year. I would expect that we have everything wrapped up by March 20th, so that on April 10th, there's nothing new, no changes, nothing significant beyond going through the process of adopting the budget. With that, I'm sure there are questions.
Have you looked at, done an initial year-end fund balance projection yet?
Excuse me, yeah, so our CDO service has done our budget, or our fund balance projections in the past. They are projecting very low fund balance at about $100,000 for the year.
Oh my God.
Yes, very low.
However,
Wow, okay.
you know, with your ARP funds, which is also very alarming, and I understand you weren't here, so please know that we know that you were not here. You know, to have $1.4 million remaining and unspent and not fully earmarked at this point is quite concerning and alarming, especially since we received memos within the past 2 months say, get your amendments in now because they won't be approving them to have them spent later on. So with having 1.4 remaining, I am sure that you're going to be freeing up your general fund this current year. So the $100,000 will turn into how much?
So right now, I would expect us to get between $600,000 and $700,000 with our current plan. With that as well, for the use of the funds, there are qualifying expenditures that we've had that have sat in the general fund. I know that the state has indicated that we can go back and make sure that those are included in the COVID funds. So if we need to, that's always an option for us as well. We have sat through and done a full audit of where we're at with those COVID funds to be able to get an amendment in as quickly as possible for anything that we don't expect to follow our original plan. And then of course, we're also looking to make sure, so those funds expire on September 30th. So we're looking to still use that allocation of funds for some of the things that it has funded in the past, like some of our summer activities, our summer PD, things like that. And that'll take the pressure off the budget for next year as well. So we're kind of looking to split the remaining funds between the 2 fiscal years, and that will assist us as well with some of this long-term right sizing, buy us a little more time.
Yeah, I think I was a little shocked when I was looking at the learning loss funds, considering the data that we just received, and that we haven't even spent half of our learning loss in the years that we've had it. I'm not sure why we haven't really, I mean, the things that we said we used it for are great for learning loss.
Right, and, you know, going through the records, what I can see that we prioritized as a district was there is a portion of the ARP ESSER that's set aside allocated for learning loss as well, in addition to that learning loss grant, and we have fully spent that 20% of that grant. So it looks to me like in the past, we prioritized there, and now that those funds are fully expensed, we're moving into that learning loss grant. So I do see that we have spent quite significantly on learning loss, just not in that specific grant.
And do we have a plan currently for the 1.4?
Yes, so we have talked about going back through. We have some equipment needs, not transportation because we'll get aid on those, but other miscellaneous equipment items. There are some materials and supplies, particularly related to some of our HVAC needs in the district, like our air filters and things like that, that will qualify under those grants, as well as staffing. There's a lot of staffing that qualifies under it that we just haven't charged.
Right. It's 1.4 though, so it has to be spent.
Staffing, yep.
Spent though.
By
Correct, yes.
9:30.
And so, and that's part of that shifting from 23-24, right? We're not gonna be able to allocate a 1.0 FTE for someone in 24-25. That grant ends September 30th, those funds aren't in place. But for 23-24, there's certainly enough that we're doing in addition to what we had previously had before these COVID grants that would qualify for a recode without implicating our MOE, not MOE, I'm sorry, supplementing, not supplanting. We would still be compliant with that, but we would need to, again, get that amendment approved, go back through, move the costs, audit it, make sure it reconciles. And that's the plan we're on currently, is getting all of those things done concurrently so that we are, the second we get approval, good to go.
Do you have an idea of what your breakdown is going to be with the $750,000 from reserves and fund balance?
So I would expect the use of EDLAR, as well as any fund balance that we end. So looking at recoding some of those expenditures, buffing our fund balance for 23-24, I would expect using some appropriated fund balance there as well. I don't have anything set in stone right now,
Okay.
but certainly there's enough funding in both that we can split it how we need to split it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question. So over the last couple of presentations, it sounds like you keep bouncing around this right sizing comment at 3 years. Is that appropriate?
I would say, yeah, between 3 to 4 years, I think is comfortable. We don't want to let it go too long because each year we leave it, it's going to compound.
So that's my question, is how did you come to that right sizing amount to be able to either manage it within 3 to 4 years or not in less than that? Why not stretch it out farther?
So I looked at a few factors. The first is some of that natural breakage that we expect to have. The idea behind spreading it over a few years is to do it as naturally as possible without disrupting things, without at the same time allowing it to go far enough that we are in a position where we are having to make some of those significant cuts. Additionally, between 3 and 4 years, when I break it down that way, I'm looking at making sure that our use of appropriated fund balance, we get to a point where we're breaking even. So if we're taking $750,000, we want to end the next year with $750,000. At bare minimum, replenish it so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where our savings are running out and we have no other option. And that 3 to 4 year timeline gives us that flexibility without putting us deeper down this pathway of not being able in the future to maybe provide some of the things that we have in the past for our students.
So that's actually my second part to my question is, so is the expectation then to look at the next potential 3 to 4 years of our budget season as maintaining?
I wouldn't say that. It's too early for me to say,
Okay.
2 years from now, that's all we're gonna be looking at. I do think that in the immediate future, in this next, budget, we are looking at tightening the belt, maintaining, but also taking that time to assess. Are our resources being used most efficiently? Can we find savings in other ways?
Okay.
I think in tandem with that curriculum work that Jen is doing, as those findings inform us, they'll inform where we allocate things in the budget, how much we're spending on certain things. So I would say I can't definitively yay or nay that quite yet, but certainly for the next few years, the context will be, are we doing this efficiently? Are we stretching our dollars and does it make sense for our students?
Well, if you can't answer that it's not gonna be that way yet, that's okay with me
Okay.
too, so, thank you.
You're welcome.
The current budget is 24.8 and this is 25.6. Does that include the capital correction that previous administration overspent?
It does currently include that, and I know last meeting we had talked about considering doing it as an authorization in 23-24. If we want to do that, we certainly can. What I would say is that budget workshop might be a great time to hammer out those details and get it one way or another moving forward.
I still think it would be a great idea to do that, to get that off the books and to lower that dollar amount, because people are gonna say, well, you went from 24.8 to 25.6, but 300,000 of it can be wiped right off the table at that point.
Certainly.
To Kate's point, are you able to, at this point, and I know you haven't been here that long, trust me, I feel you, sitting in that same seat, are you able to provide any sort of future, like a 3-year plan?
Are you?
So
Or-
at this point,
Oh,
That was wrong. I actually have to, yes.
so at this point, I do not have one right now. What I will tell you is it is in my to-dos, and I am working on one,
Okay.
specifically one that aligns with our strategic plan as a district, so that the resources are going to
Violence.
what we stated are our priorities as an educational institution.
she just wants somebody to feel the pressure too.
We're going through it together.
That's quite all right.
She's gonna steal that for hers.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When are your amendments going in? With your signature? The amendments for your grants?
I would say within the next week. We're hammering out just the final items.
I didn't know what amendments you were referring to.
You were talking to me.
There's only one.
I might not
Is it
be
okay if I keep going? Are you all set?
I might have a range.
Yeah, thank you for the presentations. I think we can, move into the rest of the business meeting at this point.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're gonna move forward, see the minutes of the February 7th meeting. Could I have a motion, please? Thank you, Elizabeth, and a second by Stephanie Kaiser, sorry. Any, any questions, corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving on. Take a motion for the treasurer's report, D1 for January. Mrs. Bliss, second by Mrs. Kaiser. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving on. I would take a motion for E1 through 4, the entire consent agenda. If Mrs. Dingman and a second by Mrs. Bliss. Everyone had a chance, what?
Couple retirements in there.
Do you want me to pull them out separate, or can we just talk
We
about
can do
them?
them all and then you can.
We'll talk about it, is that all right?
Okay.
I have the same comment on both sides of my head. There was a late addition, so make sure everybody had a chance to look at that. Any questions? Mr. Van Orman, if you, before we vote.
Certainly. So we have a couple resignations, as I put in my transmittal recently. Within the Teachers Association contract, there is a clause, retirement incentive clause, that if the teacher employee provides 4 months' notice for a letter of resignation, there's a monetary incentive for doing that. It's really a win-win for everybody, because it allows the district to start to plan about some of these upcoming retirements. So we have 2 such retirements that are submitted in here. The 4-month window, typically a retirement for a teacher would be effective right around the end of the fiscal year for schools. So anywhere from the last day of school to the last day of June of any particular year. So for this year, I received 2 of those, 2 of those letters, one from Mr. Pitts and one from Mrs. Snyder. So I'll first turn it over to Mrs. Herbst, was going to just say a couple words about Mrs. Snyder.
In her 35 and a half years, I guess, of teaching here. 23 of that was with me. She's currently at 2nd grade, and I don't know if Jen planned that when she highlighted 2nd grade, but she's been at 2nd grade for many years. I think she's taught special class, she's taught resource room, consultant teacher. She's a phenomenal reading teacher, and that's what we used her mostly in the special ed department. She's had 35 years of a wonderful teaching career, and I'm getting choked up. Many generations of students, many, and gen ed students as well. She's done a remarkable job. Definitely gonna miss her.
I just have to say really quick, if you don't mind, before I start crying, I think that Jolene would agree with me. Some of us even had Mrs. Snyder as a coach before she was a Mrs. Snyder. And I hope she watches this on camera later, because we might need to switch this so we can vote now. The time that she coached us in softball and she told us to go up and unbury the softballs that she had buried at the old track field, she actually didn't bury any softballs. That's pretty embarrassing to go home that dirty. But I can't honestly imagine opening day without her, so that's
Right.
gonna be.
And she is watching. My phone is going in.
Okay, perfect. Well,
Maybe she'll come back just for opening.
I was
day,
just gonna say.
like a visitor.
She said that she was gonna like play AC/DC or something as she walked down the aisle, so, yeah. I think we wish her well, you know.
She's definitely, I think, a teacher that would impact a very memorable employee of the district. I think that anybody that knows her will remember her, and very just great human being, and she made an impact on me. I'll never forget her as a student and as a coworker when I worked here, and as an adult and as a teacher of my kids. And so I wish her the best. I wish she wasn't going, but
Me too. One of the jobs of being a special ed teacher is to be an advocate for your kids, and there has not been a better advocate for her students with disabilities than at 2nd grade.
yeah.
Try and be the facilitator of a committee, and she's fiercely fighting for her kids. There's no question about that. I met my match a couple of times with her.
She's not one you can replace.
No, not at all. She'd definitely be missed.
Since she's watching, could we amend the agenda and have her added as a substitute, a daily substitute? Thank you so
I would
much.
guess that the text that's coming over now is no.
Thank you, Mrs. Herbst. The other one, of course, is Mr. Pitts. I asked Mr. Smiley if I could say something, just because I had worked with Mr. Pitts for so long, and so again, just like Mrs. Herbst, Mr. Pitts has been a staple. Between the two of them, 70 plus, there's around 70 years of teaching in our district, which is just an absolute testament to who they are as people and their commitment to our students and our community. So I know, I have always been very fond of Rich because he's so steady. He's here every day. He's such a professional on a subject that is not an easy subject for people to like or enjoy. I often laughed. Most people. I reflect back and I would always talk to students and they would say, "Oh yeah, Mr. Pitts is like scares us." But it was never reflected in what he did on a day-to-day basis. I think it just was a mutual respect for the way he conducted his classroom. Again, another one, you just spoke about Mrs. Snyder and her involvement outside of the classroom. Rich is somebody that has dedicated himself to coaching 2 sports most years for a long time, in addition to running our United Way fundraiser and mathathon fundraisers, where he's raised over $100,000 for worthy charitable causes. So just an absolute treasure for us as a district. So hopefully we'll be able to see both of them around in whatever capacity they choose that to be. But our school community is better because of both of them. So thank you to Rich and Becky.
Yeah, how do you follow that up? That was pretty good.
I know. And Rich was another one that was very impactful throughout my years in this district, being an alum and, again, Kate and I have been down a very similar path in our lives, but seeing Mr. Pitts come in and having him meet Mrs. Pitts, who was...
I was just gonna say, we might be the class where they...
Yes, we
They met
definitely
each other.
were, where Mrs. Tax came into the district.
I
and-
forgot that.
And they met each other, and so, I mean, he's a pretty...
Let's air all of
He taught us a lot as a math teacher and being somebody who loves math a lot. He was a great, and he was, like you said, very steady. It was very respected.
And I think a great role model for our kids. I don't know if you mentioned that outing club that he does too, but he takes kids, fishing and plans hiking trips and just above and beyond for kids that might not get those experiences otherwise. So it's really great. He's been great for our district.
Great. Another one.
Pretty lucky.
Much missed.
So I would also like to amend the agenda heads to be.
We're not doing any more retirements, so
Thank you
don't
so
bother.
much. Least favorite part.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, when you're ready.
Okay. Mrs. Decker? Yes. Mrs. Bliss?
If I must, yes.
Mrs. Dingman?
With those amendments, yes.
Mrs. Kaiser?
Yes.
Mrs. Allen?
Yes.
Mrs. Full?
Yes.
And Mrs. Madigan?
Yes, thank you. Okay, moving on, F, new business. Somebody
Will
want
you
to?
all of it?
I would
Give me-
take a motion for 1 through 4 and then 6 through 11.
Okay, can you 1 through 4 oh, okay.
Make the motion. I'll second.
Second, all right, so everything but 5,
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Allen, and a second by Mrs. Hinman. I just shortened that up because I obviously couldn't do my numbers fast enough the other way. Any questions on this group?
I love that Mr. Spector's mom is still making us wins for the district still. It's really neat. It's awesome.
Agreed?
That wasn't a question.
Yeah, no, it's all right. It was a nice comment though, so I'll take it. Any other questions or kind comments like Mrs. Decker? All right, when you're ready.
Mrs. Foltz?
Yes.
Mrs. Allen?
Yes.
Mrs. Kaiser?
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman?
Yes.
Mrs. Bliss?
Yes.
Mrs. Decker?
Yes.
And Mrs. Madigan?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I would take a motion for F5.
I'll make the motion.
Mrs. Dingman, second by Mrs. Allen. Questions?
So I am okay with the reason for this budget transfer request, but the code description, the title in there, I guess I am wondering why there's not multiple titles listed in there.
So that's just how it's set up in Envision right now. We can rename the codes as needed.
Okay. I want
Those are just internal codes.
So I think I just misspoke by saying code. I'm looking at it right now and it says from code and then there's a description and then to code and description.
Yep.
And so the description just has me questioning because it just lists one description instead of two.
Right, so that's the description, so each code has a description in Envision. That's the description matching the code in
Got
Envision
it,
right
okay,
now.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, so they're the same for both the 150 and the 160?
Yeah, so one is an instructional code
Yeah.
and one is a non-instructional code. They're
Okay.
labeled the same in there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? When you're ready.
Okay. Mrs. Bliss?
Yes.
Mrs. Kaiser?
Yes.
Mrs. Foltz?
Yes.
Mrs. Decker?
Yes.
Mrs. Dingman?
Yep.
Mrs. Allen? And Mrs. Madigan?
Yes, thank you. We'll move on to G. We have the administrative reports. Is Mr. Walter speaking, or is that just an additional?
Right, so I asked Mr. Welcher, in addition to his general administrative update, now that we had wrapped up the winter sports season, I know in the fall, Mr. Welcher came up and did a presentation. So I asked him to use that same model of PowerPoint and methodology to put together a winter sports update. But we were, in the sake of time, I wanted to be respectful of everybody's time before putting, 3 or 4 presentations
Thank you.
at one board meeting, so.
Yeah, can we just open it up to administrative report questions or the
Yeah.
Mr. Welcher's? I have to say, Mr. Welcher, if this isn't public information, kudos on thanking your wife, because it's a long season. I think that was a really good idea.
Yes,
Um,
couldn't do without her.
yeah. Do we have any questions, clarifications on these?
I just wanted to give a shout out to the girls cheerleading squad this year. I think they came so far from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. I mean, I was really, really impressed. I mean, when they performed at halftime or the basketball games at the beginning of the season, I was like, oh boy. And then by the end, I went and watched them at sectionals. They were phenomenal. So good. So
That's great that you
impressed.
went.
I'm really, really, I mean, they should be really proud of themselves. Shauna should be proud of the job that she's doing with them. It's exciting to see that develop, and it's a fairly young squad too, so hopefully, they can just continue to grow.
I was gonna say, I think that we have somebody in the audience.
Yes. So I just want to, give kudos out to probably an overlooked squad in the district at times. And they really have stepped up and said, hey, we're here, and we're here to
Awesome.
represent Red Creek, so kudos to them.
Anybody else? Okay. Mr. Norman, do you want to speak to the calendar at all, or just?
Yeah, just, I wanted to make sure I did share with you, just a moment ago approved the 24-25 district calendar for Red Creek. And I know it might be a little bit out of sequence, but this is the BOCES calendar. Does not need approval from our board, but our calendar that you just approved follows generally the big tenets that were included in this calendar, which is always important for us because in thinking about not just the students that come to our campus all the time, we have students that go to our BOCES sites either for career and tech ed or other sites. So any day that they might have school, but we might not have school for a various amount of reasons, not a snow day, like a planned day off, create some logistics that either, we're forced to ask those students to kind of come in on a day off, so to speak. Many of our CTE students have to get certain hour requirements for their programs. So anytime that we are not in session when BOCES is in session, it creates a hardship for them. And I believe that the calendar we put forward that you just approved does a really respectable job of trying to match those two things together. So we're not disadvantaging our students. I think that's important. I did also want to add in, I just came back. I don't have any paperwork in front of me, but for the last 3 days, I had the opportunity to be in Albany at a conference, New York State winter conference for superintendents. So there were a lot of sessions and professional development opportunities, but one of the reasons that it's in Albany at this time of the year is yesterday was a lobby day. So many of the superintendents had an opportunity as groups to go and meet with their elected officials in Albany. That was new to me. I had not had an opportunity to do that, obviously. Prior, it was a great learning experience for me. And the inner workings of the advocacy behind public school funding, and the challenges that the elected officials and the struggles that they have trying to match the needs of their constituents and school districts to maybe the governor's proposals or some of the maybe outdated systems that are used. For instance, our foundation aid system is a little bit outdated and tricky for us to predict the amount of funding that we would get on a year-to-year basis, which then forces us to have some of the discussions that we're having. So, those kind of learning and detailed conversations are happening at a lot of different levels. We had an opportunity to work as a Wayne Finger Lakes group and go and meet with some of those individuals yesterday and not just talk about issues that might be facing, that we might be facing here at Red Creek, but holistically within our region, because oftentimes it's those same schools. We might be the first one that faces this struggle, but next year it could be North Rose and Clyde Savannah that face it, or vice versa. So, this year, in the governor's proposal for some of our funding, some of our neighboring schools received 10% reductions from their overall budgets, which is massive. So when we talk about trying to maintain some of our programs, it is physically not possible for them to do that with the constraints that have been placed on them due to some formulas. And the concern here is that it's only a matter of time before those formulas are applied in a way that constrain us even further. So staying strong with our advocacy, staying involved, staying up to date with that information becomes critical and important. So, it was a good learning opportunity for me. I found it very valuable, and hoping that it becomes fruitful as we progress through. So, just wanted to kind of tie the bow around some of that budget and the finance stuff.
Thank you. Okay, if there's anything further, I would take a motion to move into
I have
executive.
one question
Oh,
that
yeah.
came up while we were talking earlier, and I didn't know the right time to bring it up. So the capital project, can you refresh my memory, like where we're at with it?
Yeah, so we've started to have some meetings with the architect. We are reviewing RFPs right now for construction management, which we'll be selecting soon going forward. And then, then it's the designs, clear bidding will start to go out once we have a understanding of the scope on the timelines. Submittal to SED is coming up early April.
I just hadn't heard anything in a while, and I'm like, oh yeah, we have a big capital project that's going on.
We do.
Bring it back a little bit.
Yeah, refresh my memory.
Probably not every meeting, but maybe every other month. Maybe
Okay.
just have an
Yeah.
update would be nice, just to say where we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great. Anything else?
I'll make a motion to move into executive session,
For?
personnel
Okay.
and negotiations.
Perfect, thank you. And a second? Thank you, Mrs. Bliss. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Your papers can be signed by Mr. Wallace.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for sticking